Chapter 2. On the Lake. When the first light of the rising sun spread over the dark fir trees the next morning, the kingfisher was already skimming over the river like a graceful bird. Bert was at the helm and handled the boat like an experienced sailor. Tom was sitting on a stool, keeping an eye on the sails. Carl lay stretched out in a deck chair, and Scout stood at the bow, his nose into the wind. They had all come to the boat very early that morning, for they had been too excited to sleep. Rather than lie in bed tossing and turning, each of the boys had gotten up well before daybreak and decided to head for the boat. Since they didn't want to leave their boat bikes at the dock, they had to walk. It was a long way, but they took a shortcut across the fields and drank in the early morning freshness. As farmer's son, Bert was used to getting up early and being outside before the dew had disappeared. But for his two friends, this was an unusual experience. The departure had gone without a hitch, and now they were already several kilometers from the village. They had eaten breakfast at home while it was still dark. That was several hours ago. They were beginning to get hungry again. "Hey, lazy bones," Bert called to Carl, half turning his head. "It's time for you to earn your keep." Carl sank down further in his chair and yawned, covering a big grin. "You're the steersman and I'm the machinist. I take care of the engine, and since the engine isn't working, neither am I." "Fine," Tom broke in. "Since the position of captain is still open, I'll take that. My first orders are that the machinist will double as a cook. Cook, make some coffee for the crew and fix us something to eat." Carl pulled a face, but he slowly pulled himself up out of his chair. "That's what I call putting the biggest load on the smallest camel. I just finished a murderous exam, and now I'm expected to wait on the captain and the steersman. Just remember, our food has to last for 2 weeks. At this rate, we'll have to cut our trip short because you guys ate everything." "We'll see who eats the most," cried Bert. Carl ducked into the cabin, grinning. He usually had the biggest appetite of the three, his friends knew, and this time was no exception. His stomach was growling. "I hope he knows what he's doing," muttered Tom. They heard Carl rattling pots and pans on the little stove in the cabin. He seemed to be enjoying himself, for soon he struck up a loud song. His two companions immediately joined in. It wasn't long before they smelled the delicious fragrance of fresh coffee rising from the cabin. A little later, the cook stuck his head out of the hatch and asked in an exaggerated humility, "Would the captain and the steersman like a dropped egg?" "A dropped egg?" asked Bert. "What's that?" "It depends where you drop it." "That's another name for a poached egg," explained Tom. "Fix me 2, with a side order of ham, if you please." "Same here," shouted Bert, "and drop the whole works on a piece of toast while you're at it." "At your service," cried Carl, disappearing into the cabin. Tom and Bert could almost taste the ham and eggs as they heard the sizzling coming from the kitchen. Their mouths watered. The good ship Kingfisher had found a top-notch cook. A minute later, however, they stared in disbelief as pale smoke and a sharp, burnt odor rose from the cabin doorway. Then Carl came through the door carrying a smoking frying pan and wearing a rueful grin. "That must be a burnt offering to the river gods," teased Tom. "I don't understand it," said Carl. "It looked so easy when my mother did it. I wonder what I did wrong." "Now I see why you call it a dropped egg," remarked Bert. "Just drop it overboard. I've watched my mother make poached eggs too, but then there was water in the pan. Where's your water?" Carl grimaced. "I put in a little, but it all boiled away before the eggs were done." "Why don't you change my order to a simple fried egg?" said Tom. "You heat the pan, put in a little butter, and then toss in the egg. But don't forget to take it off the fire before it turns black." Tom and Bert guffawed as Carl descended into the kitchen again, mumbling to himself about smart Alex. A little later, they again heard sizzling sounds coming from the cabin, but this time they were not followed by smoke, and the smell that rose to the deck was much more appetizing. "Attaboy!" Bert shouted into the cabin. "Just follow our orders closely and you'll learn a few things." Tom, too, joined in the teasing, but it didn't bother Carl, for he had already recovered his self-confidence, and he answered quip for quip. A little later he came topside with 3 orders of ham and eggs and 3 pieces of toast. By this time the 3 boys were ravenous and ate as if it were their first breakfast. Scout was not forgotten. Tom had seen to it that there was plenty of dog food aboard, but he also shared a piece of ham with his dog. They were now lazily drifting with the current. The wind had almost died down, but that didn't bother the boys, for they were in no hurry. At this speed, steering the boat posed no problems whatsoever. "I have the feeling that this is the beginning of a great vacation," said Tom. His friends nodded, and Scout showed his agreement by drumming his tail on the deck. A large pleasure boat crowded with vacationers went by. The young sailors waved, and the people waved back, watching with obvious admiration the sleek sailboat that cut the water so gracefully. The day passed swiftly. When they came to an old town on the river, the boys decided to anchor there for the night, because dusk was not far off. 3 days later, the Kingfisher had already covered quite a distance. At first the 3 sailors had followed the river until they reached a wide canal. After following the canal, turning down 2 smaller waterways, they had come to a large lake, where they were now. They planned to stay here a couple of days. They had seen and learned much. The cooking was going much better. The chore usually fell on Carl, who was quickly developing into a first-rate cook. Tom and Bert readily admitted that their earlier judgment had been premature. Handling the sails and steering the boat had posed few problems. In one of the canals, however, Tom had steered the boat into a drawbridge before it was completely open. The boat got several ugly scratches from the encounter, and the boys became embroiled in an argument with the bridge keeper, who began calling Tom names. As long as they were still within earshot of the angry bridge keeper, Bert and Carl kept their composure. But when the man went inside after a parting barrage, they laughed until their sides ached. They teased Tom unmercifully. Fortunately, he was wise enough to take all the comments on his masterful piloting in stride with a rueful grin. He had consoled himself with the thought that their turn would come. The place they were anchored was breathtakingly beautiful. The lake was excellent for swimming, and they had plenty of room to try out the Kingfisher's speed and practice various maneuvers. They learned to know the sailboat well. The surrounding country was beautiful. On one side, the lake was bordered by woods, and on the other side by waving fields of grain. Beyond them, in the distance, lay a picturesque farming village. When the boys discovered that the lake was well stocked with fish, and that Carl considered himself a master fish fryer, they agreed that this was an ideal spot to spend a few days. After supper, they explored the lake shore where they were anchored. A farmer working in the field pointed them to a spot where he claimed the fish really bit. It was in a quiet, pretty little cove. Mirrored in the still water were yellow and white water lilies and many other plants and flowers growing along the shore. Sometimes the surface would suddenly be broken by a jumping fish that sent out ripples in ever-widening circles. The boys were elated. It was the perfect spot. Immediately they agreed to come here early the next morning to do a little fishing. Fish bit best early in the morning, Bert told them. It was quite late by the time they returned from their long walk, and they still had a lot to do before they could retire. Tom got out the fishing equipment, while Bert looked for worms, and Carl made dough balls, also for bait. Carl packed a lunch for tomorrow morning. Finally, everything was ready, and they could crawl into their bunks. They had a short night, for at 4 o'clock the next morning the alarm clock went off. None of them felt much like getting out of bed, but the insistent ring of the clock, accompanied by Scout's excited bark, soon had them wide awake. Setting a good example, Bert jumped out of his bunk, followed a little later by Tom. When Carl ignored the good example and stayed in bed with his eyes closed, Bert accidentally tipped a glass of water on his head. That worked wonders. Carl was out of bed in a split second. He threw himself on Bert, and a wild wrestling match ensued. Although Carl was very quick, Bert was much stronger. But Tom broke up the fight before a victor could be declared, reminding them of the planned fishing expedition. That ended it. In almost no time, they were dressed and ready to go. Tom carefully locked the cabin, and they left the boat by the gangplank. The outside air was fresh and cleared the remaining cobwebs from their minds. They took a deep, appreciative breaths. The grass along the lake was wet with dew. A mood of peacefulness still lay on the land. They enjoyed the walk to the cove in silence. When they reached their fishing spot, they were wide awake and eager to try their luck. Night was slowly yielding to day as the sun spread a red glow on the eastern horizon. The three boys found themselves places not far away from each other and threw out their lines. They soon found out that the farmer who had pointed them to this spot had not been fooling. Within 5 minutes, Tom had a bite. His two friends looked on in surprise. But Tom made no mistakes, and soon he had landed a large bass that continued to fight even on shore. This first bite was quickly followed by others. Bert and Carl also caught their share. In a short time, their pail was filled with wriggling fish, and all three boys were elated at their success. Scout seemed no less excited by the catch. He watched the float closely and barked when it bobbed under water. Whenever another fish was landed, the dog went wild with excitement. After fishing for over an hour, they ate a hearty breakfast from the sandwiches Carl had prepared last night. He had thought of everything, including a large thermos full of hot tea. They continued fishing for some time yet, but they got fewer and fewer bites. "It looks as if the fish have gone to bed," said Tom, after they hadn't caught anything for half an hour. Maybe they've woke up, joked Carl, "and that's why none of them are being taken in by our bait." The three boys decided they had caught enough fish. They would have to eat a lot to finish them in one meal. In high spirits, they set out back to their boat. The sun was already beginning to warm the air. "Frying fish can't be much fun in this kind of weather," remarked Bert. "Oh, it's not so bad," assured Carl. "Just keep thinking how good they will taste, and then you can cool off in the lake afterward." They were approaching the spot where the kingfisher lay tied up. Before they could see the yacht, they had to pass through a small stretch of woods. "Look at Scout!" Tom cried suddenly. The German shepherd was sniffing the breeze, which was blowing in their faces. He uttered a deep growl and dashed ahead. "Here, Scout, come back!" shouted Tom, who didn't want to let the dog out of sight. Scout obeyed reluctantly. The fur on his neck bristled. He looked furious. The group hurried through the woods. A few more meters, and they could see the kingfisher. The boat lay bobbing peacefully on the gleaming surface of the lake. They saw nothing unusual. All of them heaved a sigh of relief. The next moment, however, Carl uttered a cry of astonishment and pointed to the boat. A small dark creature darted up the mast. "It's a monkey!" exclaimed Tom. One surprise gave way to another as suddenly a lanky figure appeared on deck. He shouted and motioned to the monkey to come down, but the creature paid no attention to him. It was busy peeling an orange, and it tossed the peelings at the man below. "He's got his nerve!" exclaimed Bert. The others weren't sure whether he was talking about the tall intruder or the monkey. "The door to the cabin is open," Tom cried. "I'm sure I locked it before we left." They were now close to the yacht. Through the open cabin door came another young hoodlum. A huge yellow dog followed him on a leash and began barking angrily when it spotted Scout. It was an ugly but powerful beast. It bared wicked-looking teeth at the approaching boys. Aroused to fury, Scout forgot his master's command and charged at the boat. Giving up his attempts to make the monkey come down from the mast, the tall fellow jumped to the gangplank and quickly pulled it into the boat. "What are you guys doing on our boat?" Tom shouted. The young hoodlum with the dog laughed. "Don't get tied in a knot," he taunted. "We're only looking. This is some boat you guys got here. Your old man must be a fat capitalist." Tom was about to shout back an angry answer when two more people came out of the cabin. One was very short with curly red hair and a face blotched with large freckles. From his shoulder dangled an old concertina. The other was a young man who appeared to be the oldest member of the gang. He was swarthy, lean, and muscular, and his face was stamped with insolence and raw power. To the boys on shore he called, "Is this your boat?" Yes, Tom replied shortly. Joe, push that plank to shore so that these boys can come aboard, ordered the swarthy fellow. The tall one rushed to obey. Still indignant, the three young boys crossed the gangplank to their boat. Tom held Scout by the collar to keep him from attacking the large yellow dog. The latter pulled at the leash that held him and snarled menacingly. But the youth holding him snapped, "Shut up, Lupus, or I'll boot ya!" Lupus seemed to know what that meant, for he immediately quieted down. The leader of the group stepped forward and said, "Let me introduce us. My name's Jimmy, boxer, acrobat, and leader of this wild bunch. This is Joe. That's his monkey, but it don't listen to him. The freckle-faced redhead is Charlie. He's our musician. And those two uglies are Louie and Lupus." The three boys had to laugh at the last introduction, for the dog and his master really did resemble each other, and the monkey looked handsome compared to either one of them. This broke the ice a little, although the boys were still unhappy about the liberties that their visitors had taken. Jimmy told them that he and his buddies followed the circus around and hit all the local fairs. They traveled in a small house trailer. They had reached the lake only this morning. Tomorrow a large annual fair was opening in a nearby town, and they hoped to make a little money. "How'd you get the door to the cabin open?" Tom demanded. Jimmy looked surprised. "It was unlocked." "I locked it myself," Tom replied challengingly. "You must be mistaken, kid," the boxer growled. "We're no crooks, see? We're honest, hard-working guys." Tom didn't say anything. He didn't want to start a fight. But Jimmy could say what he wanted. Tom didn't believe him for a moment. Then, to the relief of the boys, the intruders left, promising, however, that they would drop in again sometime. "What a suspicious bunch," said Bert as he watched their uninvited guests leave. Carl had disappeared into the cabin. He discovered that a few oranges which had been in a bowl on the table were gone, but on first glance nothing else seemed to be missing. "They must have picked the lock," guessed Tom. "I'm sure I locked everything. I think we got back just in time. I don't trust that bunch at all." They put the unpleasant encounter out of their minds, and Carl began frying fish. It wasn't long before each of them had a plate full of hot, tasty fish before them. They ate on deck. Sitting with their back to shore, they had a broad view over the lake. Here and there, waterfowl swam in the still water that dappled gently in the morning sun. Suddenly, they heard footsteps on deck. When they turned around, Charlie, the red-headed musician, was standing behind them, holding an old pail. "Hey, guys, could you lend us a few of your fish? Those look good," he said, motioning toward their plates. "Go catch your own," Carl said coldly. "There are plenty of them in the lake." "Yeah, but we ain't got fancy fishing rods like you guys. We ain't rich. Come on, you got plenty. Have a heart," he pleaded unashamedly. Tom shook his head. "We caught just enough for a meal for each of us, and it took us a long time to catch them and to clean and fry them." "If you're hungry, we can let you have enough potatoes for a meal," offered Bert. "Potatoes!" Charlie sniffed contemptuously. "We can get them from any field around here. All right, keep your crummy fish if you're so cheap." He was about to say more, but Scout stood up and advanced toward him threateningly. That cut him short. With a muttered curse, Charlie turned and walked away. After filling up on fish, the boys felt sluggish and sleepy. Although the heat wasn't as oppressive on the water as it was on land, the withering heat affected them too. Besides, they had gotten up very early that morning. On the afterdeck, they had put up one of the sails as a roof to keep off the sun. In the shade, they each fixed themselves a place to sleep and were soon dozing peacefully. They had nothing to worry about because they had pulled in the gangplank and ordered Scout to stand guard. Scout lay dozing too with his head on his forepaws, but his ears were alert to every sound. They slept about an hour and then went for a swim. The lake water was cool and refreshing, and when they came out and were dressed, they were once again brimming with energy. "I'd like to see where that bunch that visit us is camped," Tom said suddenly. The other two looked at him in surprise. "You don't want to drop in on them, do you?" asked Bert. "The less we have to do with those guys, the better I like it." "No, I don't mean that way. I just want to see where they have parked their trailer. We'd be smart to keep an eye on those characters." They decided to scout around in the direction the unwanted visitors had gone. Scout was left behind to look after the boat. The German shepherd sadly watched his companions go, but he obediently stayed on deck. After a few minutes, they were deep in the nearby woods. They had a hard time keeping their direction straight. A narrow path led through the dense underbrush, but after a while it forked. As they hesitated, unsure which trail to take, they suddenly heard a voice nearby saying, "That'll be the day when you can put one over on me." Startled, the three friends looked at one another. It took them a few seconds to realize that the words were not aimed at them. Now they heard more voices on the other side of the bushes. Carefully, the boys stole down the left fork. 10 yards farther, the path turned sharply. When they warily peered around the bushes, they saw a small trailer hidden under the trees on the edge of the woods. The outside of the trailer had once been white, but now it was a dirty gray, mottled with yellow and rust. From where they were, they couldn't see into the trailer, but painted over the door in red letters were the words, "The Happy Wanderers." This must be what the gang called themselves. A horse was grazing nearby. The gang lived in a horse-drawn trailer, but the animal was a young, powerful-looking stallion with slender legs and a shiny coat. It didn't seem to fit with the gang. At first, the boys couldn't see the gang, but then they heard voices again. Bending aside some branches, they saw 3 of the 4 stretched out on the ground in the shadow of the trees. They seemed to be playing cards and kept accusing one another of cheating. Joe, without his monkey, was there, as well as Louie and Charlie. Jimmy, the leader of the group, was nowhere to be seen, and neither was a yellow-haired dog. Tom, Bert, and Carl watched a little while and were just about to slip away when they saw Jimmy and the dog emerging from the woods some distance away. The monkey was riding on Jimmy's shoulder. The group near the trailer had also spotted their leader. They quickly put away their cards, and Joe shouted, "Hey, how'd your hunting trip go?" The approaching hoodlum grinned and took a dead chicken from under his jacket. He tossed it to Charlie and snapped, "Pluck it right away. When it's in the bin, nobody can say we stole it." Lupus, who seemed to have caught the scent of Tom and his companions, began growling angrily and moved in the direction of the concealed onlookers. Jimmy called him back, but the dog remained restless, so the 3 explorers figured it was time for them to leave. When they were out of earshot, Bert said, "They don't exactly make the best neighbors. They stole that chicken and who knows what else. I bet they make their living that way." "Let's get on the boat and sail to the other side of the lake," proposed Carl. "Put some distance between us and that bunch." But his 2 friends did not agree. "We got here first, and it's a beautiful spot," argued Tom. "I'm not going to let myself be scared off by a bunch of creeps. We have Scout to keep an eye on the boat. Besides, they're not the kind to stay in one place for very long. Tomorrow they're due at that big fair in town. Then they'll probably go, and we'll never see them again." Carl agreed to try to ignore their new neighbors. They did decide to buy a sturdy padlock that day for the cabin door, because hoodlums in the trailer seemed to be able to open the existing lock at will. Bert said he wouldn't mind going to town to do a little shopping, so he turned off the path while Tom and Carl went on toward the boat to get supper ready. They received an ecstatic welcome from Scout, who was delighted to see them back. An hour went by before Bert returned from town. It had been farther than he had thought, and he had done quite a bit of shopping. While they ate, Bert told them what he had seen in town. The annual fair, which would open tomorrow, seemed to be quite an event. The whole town was preparing. The streets were decorated, tents and booths were being set up, and the local storekeepers were getting ready for the large crowds that were expected. A huge animal auction would be held in the town square. Thousands of buyers and onlookers came every year. "I wouldn't mind looking in on the auction myself tomorrow," said Bert. His friends were curious too, so they decided that the next morning they would go to town together. A large fair like that was bound to have something to interest them. That evening they stayed aboard the boat and relaxed. It was a beautiful, quiet summer evening, and they all wrote letters home. Since they didn't want their parents to worry, they made no mention of the gang that was camped near them. They were still busy writing when the stillness was shattered by loud music from the direction of the trailer. Carl put his fingers in his ears. "Sounds like a lovesick cat," he said disgustedly. The Happy Wanderers seemed to be playing records, but both the records and the record player were in poor condition. This didn't seem to bother the gang, for every time a familiar song came on, they joined in. Several times Charlie tried to play along on his concertina, with horrible results. For almost an hour, the shrill blare of the record player spoiled the stillness of the evening. The birds were struck dumb by the noise. Tom and his friends grew more and more irritated. Scout blinked his eyes nervously at the sound of the music, and every so often he uttered a low growl as if in protest. Lupus seemed to be affected by the music too, for periodically the boy heard a long, drawn-out howl, as if he too wanted to join in the screeching chorus. At long last, silence was restored. The three friends decided to go to bed early and get a good night's sleep. They were now all agreed that they had no wish to spend another evening near the noisy bunch in the trailer. If the gang stayed tomorrow, they would move the Kingfisher to the other side of the lake. So saying, they undressed and crawled into their bunks.